So yesterday I made a video about like compulsive, like non-stop content consumption, and today I just kind of wanted to discuss, like, because obviously in this day and age, you can't really avoid consuming certain content. I mean, everyone does it, right? It's not like you're going to be able to realistically consume nothing unless it's just like, you know, it's not the past anymore. We live in a very advanced society, and sure, you technically could, but anyways, not the point. You probably will still do it even after watching that. And nevertheless, I figured there's still something to say about the content you do end up watching and consuming. So this video kind of came into my mind when I realized that I listen to a lot of music that doesn't really get me anywhere. And music's just one example, but it's just one that stood out to me because a lot of the music that I listen to and a lot of people I know listen to isn't very productive, in the sense it puts you in an emotional state that it is not helpful or necessary. So what do I mean? Like, why am I withholding this? I'm not. For example, really, really sad music, really like demotivating, really depressing music. I don't necessarily listen to like super depressing music or anything, but I do listen to some music for like nostalgia or, really kind of relaxed but ultimately numb music, talking about emotional states that aren't very good, like being depressed or whatever, or just being numb as fuck. And I realized that listening to this all the time is not getting you anywhere, because you're just intentionally putting yourself in a state of mind that is completely unproductive. I mean, if you listen to hours of music that really demotivates you, and just makes you feel really shit all the time, right? Makes you feel like you're just numb, makes you feel depressed or whatever, you're not getting anywhere. And all you're really doing with that is just indulging in this emotion of sadness, ultimately, or just any negative emotion. It doesn't necessarily have to be sadness, but you get the point. And, don't get me wrong, I do love listening to some of these artists, like Mac Miller and whatnot, for take one example, right? But to an extent, some of this music is just not productive at all. Like, I'll hear it and it literally makes me feel worse than I felt before I heard the song. And that's not necessarily, like, you can listen to this music, you can listen to it, you can hear it out, but it shouldn't be, again, the music you're continuously listening to. Same with like nostalgic music you have tied to some time or place, because what you're really doing is just indulging in emotions from the past and not focusing on your current present moment. So music's one example I just described. Same with like media and other things. If you're constantly listening to news and information that is ultimately nihilistic, that is ultimately, like, let's say you're listening to news about the state of the world right now, and the way it's all framed is just, we're doomed, basically, that sort of stuff. Or like, the world is boiling up, it's all gonna break out in another war, or you're gonna end up having to do this is so bad, or your food's poisoned, everything's bad for you, plastics in your body, plastics in your balls, that sort of thing. Sure, don't get me wrong, some of this stuff is true and you can be pissed off about it, and it's good to be aware of these things, but you don't want to be listening to it to the point where it's literally changing how you live your life. Because if you live with this mindset that everything's poisonous, everything's pretty much bad for you, you're addicted to dopamine, there's no hope, your money's being taken away, you're being basically crunched to either being really, really poor, or you need to make it out to be really, really rich, because whatever, the middle class or whatever, I don't want to go into too many specifics, but the point is, you need to really, really watch the things you consume, right? Because this is what it's all about. It's about putting you in a state of mind, and that state of mind could be a good one. You could listen to music that motivates you. You could listen to news that tells you the truth but doesn't tell you you're fucked, right? But there's more incentive to put you in a numb state, because if you're less motivated if you're, you know, less hopeful, if you basically believe that you have no future, you're more likely to just give up. You're more likely to not do anything with your life and just keep consuming this content, because it just becomes a compulsive loop, right? And yeah, I wanted to basically say how you really, really need to watch this. And you know, this a warning goes to not just those two types of content. There's also a lot of different things, like, you know, drama and you know, rage baiting and stuff like that, just stuff to spike your emotional states. And I was thinking about this, and you know, one of the reasons I'm making this video is because every time I make a video, even if I'm not necessarily perfect on it, I wanna tell you about the flaw that I'm seeing, because it kind of forces me to practice what I preach, right? I can't realistically sit here and tell you to do this and then not at least integrate it myself somehow. So this is kind of going out to me and you, basically. Watch what you put into your brain, because with music, with media, with YouTube videos, with shorts and reels or whatever, you know, ultimately all of this stuff is affecting your state of mind on a subconscious level, right? And if the alteration that you're putting there, by choice by the way, is completely unproductive, is completely just going to make you feel worse, right? Then it's not, you know, it's kind of clear that this is not a path you should be going down. And yeah, like why would you want this? You know, I get why, because I do this myself sometimes. You know, I listen to nostalgic music sometimes because I want to feel some of these emotions from the past. But I think to myself, why do I want to feel them? Why don't I just want to make the present and make it something else? And ultimately it comes down to indulging in emotions is really nice, right? You feel good, you know, bringing back old emotions from the past, or, you know, you listen to a song that you heard with this girl you used to see or whatever, or you listen to a song, or, you know, you watch something that you watched with some of your friends from the past or whatever. But the truth is, the past not only is already the past, and you already know that, but if you're on this mindset that you want to grow every day, you'll realize that your past self wasn't all that great, you know? Your past self ultimately made a lot of mistakes, made a lot of mistakes, made a lot of decisions that you'd question nowadays. I mean, I don't know if you're like me, but I look back, you know, at myself a year from now, and I'm not necessarily proud of who I was to a complete extent. But then that year, I thought I was a lot better than the year before. So I look at myself from the current state to 2 years back, and it's even worse, you know. So I don't know what I'll look at myself like, you know, a year from now, 2 years from now. But ultimately, you shouldn't be trying to relive past emotions, or spike yourself with emotions that are completely unproductive, you know. You don't really get anywhere by listening to information about the world framed in a way to make you feel like everything's gonna fall apart. There's no point to anything. There's no point listening to this nihilistic worldview when, you know, you could just kind of, you know, look around what's actually going on around you specifically. You know, ignore everything else for a second and put yourself in a bit of a bubble. Your life right now, excuse me, your life right now is not really that as bad as you might think it is, you know? If you're able to watch this, and I say this in a lot of these videos, but if you're able to watch this right now, chances are your life is nowhere near as bad as, you know, the world will try to tell you, or as people will try to convince you that it's going to get worse or whatever. It's really not that bad. It really isn't. And you've got a lot of power to change the current situation that you're in, right? You can do a lot about this, but if you listen to music that makes you think, or, I mean, I keep pointing to music, but, you know, it really does go to any sort of media. If you go to, you know, consume this content that ultimately on a subconscious level makes you believe that nothing really matters, you're not going to make anything of your life. And you don't really, I mean, I don't see any point in wanting to live that way, you know? So I just kind of made this as like a little bit of a warning, I suppose, maybe, or just like a call to action, you know? Really examine the things that you consume when it comes to your mind. because you wouldn't choose a shit diet and expect it to help your body grow, right? Same, you wouldn't choose actions for your like physical state, like you wouldn't avoid working out, for example, and then expect yourself to get better physically. Same with your diet. But what you feed your mind is also important, and it's not an original concept, but I hope I can frame it in such a way that you can kind of see my point, that there's no benefit in listening to this stuff. Sure, it's kind of literally like fast food. It helps you indulge in certain emotions, it spikes certain states of mind, or it reminds you of what used to be, but there's no inherent value in that beyond just feeling a certain way in this exact moment, right? When you listen to a sad song from the past that you listened to with your mates when you used to do whatever, or those times are gone, and you can accept that, and sure, you can still enjoy the song here and there. But if you're constantly just living for the past, or living for a emotion that some certain kind of content will spike, or you're listening to nihilistic news and nihilistic information, or you're focusing on the emotions that other people have because people make content about like drama or whatever, there's no value in you doing that, because you ultimately will be just living in this bubble that I described earlier, right? None of that stuff really matters or affects your life at all. So by doing this, what you're doing is you're making it affect your life. And why would you want that? Like, it's ultimately not important what is going on in other people's social circles, but those people happen to post it on the internet and you happen to follow along with it. Like, there's no inherent value in that. Same with, there's no inherent value in watching information that makes you feel like shit because the world feels like it's about to end. It's probably not going to end, and even if it does, at this current moment, you probably can't really control it. So why would you let yourself, unless you can control it, unless that's something you want to do, but that should be the motivator. That should be the thing making you think, okay, I want to change this. You want to have a progressive like mindset. You want to be able to progress and make effective, meaningful changes, and not just listen to stuff that will ultimately make you just keep thinking of the past, keep thinking of either how bad the present is when it's not even that bad, or listen to music, or watch content that just makes you feel like shit all the time. There's no benefit in that, and I'm saying it really plainly, and I'm saying it really vaguely, but the reason I'm doing that is because it applies to a lot of things, and I just want to get the point across. I think that sometimes I'll say something in a certain way. You'll hear the same piece of advice a bunch of times, and someone will eventually say it in a way that clicks for you. And maybe this video did. But the point is, you adjust the stuff that you feed your brain, because in the same way you would adjust the stuff that you feed your body. So, yeah, to live like an actually good and happy life, you need to stop giving a shit about some of these things. You need to stop giving a shit about, the guy singing about like his problems and how bad he feels, because why would you want to listen to how bad he feels when your life is nowhere near as bad as that, for example, right? Or watch news that tells you that the world's going to be ending, or everything's going to shit. There's no point in that, because you do ultimately live in this bubble at the current minute. So focus on what you can do, and stop feeding yourself content and information that makes you feel shit, even though you don't really have to. You've got a lot more control about your emotional state than you think. Ultimately, like you can really, if you're listening to sad music and you just change the song to be happier, your brain will feel happier, right? So yeah, and I'm not saying you should just ultimately always feel happy or always feel good and motivated. That's a whole other thing. But you don't want to be constantly feeding, like I said, on a subconscious level, stuff that isn't productive. So examine this stuff. Examine the different kinds of content you consume, and examine what kind of value it brings. Because if you are listening to narratives that tell you everything's meaningless, or you're listening to narratives that are ultimately making you feel like shit or making you feel sad, and then with those emotions you're not really taking action on the life that you do control, you know, what advantage does that have? You know, other than just feeling good. It's just like a drug at that point, and yeah, that's not really productive at all. So that's kind of all I wanted to say for this one. It was a little bit all over the place, but yeah, if you like this content, you know what to do, and have faith and keep going, my friend.